All right, we have reached the MVC pattern.
Yes, this is a big part of the web.
Yep. ASP.NET Core includes an implementation of the MVC pattern, and this has kind of been what we've been building up to. It sits on top of a lot of the existing concepts that we've talked about, but it's also important to point out that MVC, within the context of ASP.NET Core, is a piece of middleware.
Oh, it's middleware as well.
It is itself middleware.
Oh, yeah, because it's part of the pipeline.
And it includes other things in the pipeline like routing.
Yes, but, we're going to look at that later, but do we have to include adding routing when we add MVC to our application?
That's actually a good place to start, in fact.
Okay.
So let's do this. Let us head over into our application. This is the same app that we've been playing with. And what we're going to do here is we're going to make a couple of changes, and then we'll talk about MVC. All this work here, let's actually make a little white space just to feel more comfortable. All of that route stuff is stressing me out.
It is?
It's stressing me out, and I don't like it.
Why? Is it just too much repetition?
It's too much repetition. It's too, I want to have little functions and action methods that do the things that I want. So I'm going to delete all of that. That's gone.
Okay.
This app.run, it's been too long for this world, and that's gone too.
Yeah, we've been using it for a bit.
It's too much. Okay. So let's go and let's add MVC to this application.
So we'd be adding a new package?
Exactly. So it's adding a new package, and it's ASP.NET Core MVC. This is a tricky thing to point out here.
There are two of them.
There's two. There's ASP.NET Core MVC, and then there's ASP.NET Core MVC.core. This is a slightly smaller version of MVC. Don't use it.
I don't use the one on the top?
Don't use the one on the top.
But it's so tempting, though.
It is tempting, and it should probably be lower down, or honestly, I think it should be hidden. I think the issue is that if you want the Model View Controller framework for ASP.NET, which is what you do, just pick that one. If you know what you're doing, this is just the core components. It gives you actually less. And I'll show you something. Remember, we saw those dependency kind of chains.
Yeah.
One depends on the other. So frankly, just get MVC and you'll be a happier person. So let's go and get that, and let's watch what happens. Okay. So within MVC, we got a lot of stuff. We've got data annotations. We've got things to make JSON and JavaScript to serialize or to create JSON. We've got localization for doing things in multiple languages. We're going to learn about Razor, which is a way to make HTML, and tag helpers that we have a whole section on.
We have a whole section tomorrow.
This is all included, and it falls all the way down. And notice that there's that MVC.core. So it's going to show up anyway.
So if we had only installed that, we would be missing so much.
You'd be missing some important things, and you might find yourself a little frustrated. So the point I'm making is that the top level is ASP.NET Core MVC. And that includes everything that we're going to want to make either HTML or JavaScript. So that's what we want to get. So if we go back over to Startup.
So before we go into that, should we take some time and kind of figure out how MVC actually works?
Okay, let's do this. Let's add the simplest hello MVC.
Okay.
And then let's compare it to a diagram and go back and forth.
It sounds like fun.
So let's remove routing, remove that directory browser.
It's gone.
Okay. And we're just going to say one thing. It's going to be very simple. Add MVC.
That's nice.
Nice and clean. Okay. And then we're going to say app.useMVC. And that's it. We can get rid of all that white space.
That's all that's done. So,
okay. So what we need is a controller.
Okay, because I was going to say, what's going to show up on your screen?
Exactly. Nothing. So we're going to make a controller. I'm going to go here and I'm going to make a new folder, and I'll call it controllers. And then within that, we'll add a class, and we'll call it Maria Controller. Not that you're controlling, but I'm just saying. And we're going to say public string and this will be kind of our index. And remember this is very similar to what we were doing before. We have a little, what's called a lambda, or a little string there, exactly. And what we're going to do is we're going to put on attribute routing. We're going to say HTTP GET /. So all that complicated routing stuff that we learned
All
about,
those lines has been put into this.
right.
That's it.
Because we're sitting on top of routing. And this is a nice, clean way to say when you do a GET, handle this here and run that little piece of code right there. Okay? So let us see if that works. And if it does, then we'll talk about it and figure it out. And if it doesn't, we will panic.
Oh.
Yep. There's that me not shutting it down. I should probably switch to IIS at some point. All right.
Okay.
Hello from MVC.
So this is basically, what we're seeing here is from the controller.
Yes, perfect.
So this is not
This is not MVC.
C. It's not a view. So like this is
Well,
not.
it's not even M or V. This
It's
is
just C.
Just C.
Okay.
So let's take a look. So you drew some diagrams to explain this to people.
Yeah, it's very how I see MVC.
You have green hair.
I have green hair because she's from another planet, but let's just go with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the user, or in this case the browser, uses the controller, passes in information from the URL. That's how you interface. You say localhost / something.
Okay.
A controller gets invoked. This controller in some way needs to be invoked. So we come in and we say /Maria. Routing is still in there.
Okay, it's still in there.
But remember, we had that HTTP GET attribute. In this case, I think we said /. We could certainly change that to /Maria.
Okay.
Okay. It decided that that was the controller in charge. Now, in this case, though, we didn't make a model. We didn't go to a database.
No, we didn't do anything like that.
We didn't make any HTML. We just kind of bypassed it all.
So it just went right back to the...
And we passed in the hello world string. So that was the first beginning part of the loop.
Of how things come back.
Exactly. Okay, so that's the beginning of model view controller. But we're close. We'll get there.
We'll get there?
Yeah. And let's try to add a little bit. Okay. See if this works. All right, now this is interesting.
So what's just happened?
Notice that the name of the method there doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all.
Because we mapped /Maria to a method that we just happened to call something else. There is no particular reason that there needed to be a relationship. We didn't need to call that Maria.
I don't, so, but we just did it.
We called it something else, and it got mapped that way.
Okay.
And we could do a test even where let's go ahead and close that. And let us change this. We'll just get rid of that attribute. We'll call this method Maria and see if we can access it that way. Do you think it will work?
I think it will. But that's... Oh.
Why not?
Because it doesn't have a mapped attribute?
It doesn't have a route, exactly. There's no routing attribute. And there's no other route over in startup. Because you can have centralized routes, and you can have routing attributes.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to add another attribute on top of that?
Well, so we could go and put it back like that, which is totally fine. But we could also do what's called convention over configuration. We could kind of just agree that we wanted our URLs to map to controllers in a certain way. We could just kind of decide. Like if it's the Maria controller, it should be /Maria.
Okay.
And the Scott controller would automatically be /Scott.
Okay, so it would look for it.
It would look for it automatically. So back over here, when we did our very, very simple use MVC, this is always the way though, isn't it? Where you teach someone the really low level stuff and you say, remember all that hard part that I showed you? Yeah, forget that.
You don't need that anymore.
You don't need that.
You don't need that anymore.
MVC. It's better. Okay, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to take a little bit of code that I had lying around and I'm going to paste it in here. This code that I'm going to paste in here is the code you would get when you say file new MVC application.
Okay, so this already comes pre-baked in the MVC template.
So you don't even need to know anything. This is automatic. This is what they call the default route. I just wanted to bring it in because remember that we built this application up from Hello World at command line.
Yep. So you could just you could grab this from a new application and dump it in here and it would work.
Yep. Or you could just file a new project and use that new application and that would just be what you use. Okay. So I've changed that. Let's just look at the difference. There's use MVC, and then there's the one that you can pass in routing information. So that's the one that we're going to paste in right there. Oops. There we go. So use MVC, and now look at that map route. We saw a map route before. This is a little more sophisticated. We named it. We have controller /action /something. So this is like blog /post /6.
Okay.
Okay. What's this though?
The index, is that referring to a page?
This is referring to a method, and that is referring to a controller. So for example, let's say that I went and passed in /home. I'll do it with a comment. Or I passed in /home /index, or I passed in /home /index /5. Right? Or Scott /products /4. This is the default controller name. So if I just pass in // it will automatically call home, index, and then in this case, the ID is optional.
Oh, that's why it has a question mark.
Yeah. So we will go and we'll figure out. So right now, according to this, the default controller is home and index. Let's go look what our controller is called Maria. Let's get rid of those there, okay? And let's make Maria and something else the default. Okay, so I think we will hit /, and that will be the default. Let's find out.
So Maria will be the default now.
Hope so. So that said, hello Maria from MVC, just right there. So let's talk about this process here. It needed to make a Maria controller, and it needed to call a particular public method. So we mapped by saying this is the default. If you don't have a controller, use Maria. And if you don't have an action,
use something else.
Use something else. Okay. Let's try passing in /home /index. There is no home controller. Wasn't there a Maria /index? Let's try that. Maria /index. So that one works. So that makes me think I can probably go and say public class Scott controller, public string index. And instead of doing a lambda, I'll just do it like this. All right. Notice that I haven't added anything about routing there.
Nothing at all.
What routing information are we using? The default.
Default.
All right. Scott. Okay. Did not work. Index.
Huh.
All right. So
Why didn't Scott not work?
All right, let's look at this again. What's the default action called?
Miriam.
No, that's
No, sorry. Something else.
right. Did Scott have a method called something else?
No, but
no.
For Maria.
So these are silly defaults then, with all due respect to Maria and something else. Let's change them back to reasonable defaults, home and index. That means that index will be the default for any controller.
Absolutely any of them.
Anything, unless I change the routing at some point and come up with another plan for routing. So here, I should be able to go and say /Maria and /Scott. And I'm getting the right controllers. And you can even see this happen as it says controller action invoker, right? The thing that invokes the action, that starts the action, is being called, and it says, I'm executing the action method. This is really important to think about because we're effectively calling methods just by changing the URL, right? Like I say /Scott, and the Scott method gets called. Like that index method rather gets called every time I hit that. And that's because there is a controller action invoker that is doing that. So let's back up then and look at the green-haired girl. All right. Oops. So this beginning relationship where it's like /home/index uses routing, and someone makes the controller. They call it, they new it up.
Okay, is new it up?
That's what we say. Like when you who did you remember writing? We didn't write new. Var x equals new controller.
No.
Who made it?
We did it in Visual Studio by adding a new class.
No, but who made it at runtime? Who created a new controller? Every time you hit a request, a controller gets made.
Yeah.
And someone calls the function.
And that's what's called newing up?
No, the newing up is the making of the thing. Like you'll notice that we have a controller right here called Scott controller.
Yeah.
But there's no code anywhere in the entire application where I went and said new Scott controller. Someone else ran new. They had a controller factory where they're passing Scott controllers out and Maria controllers out.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So the idea is that we have a request that comes in. The routing system says, okay, which controller's handling this? All right, I'm going to new one up. All right.
Okay. Yeah, I see it.
See? And now I'm going to call it, call index, call whatever, and then I'll throw it away.
Okay.
So we're making all those calls. So now we need to do something and like make a model and talk to a view.
So the controller manipulates it to a sense, but then what happens?
Whatever you want. So in this case, let's talk about this. We went and returned a string. We kind of cheated a little bit. I'll show you a little trick. We said that our controller returns string. Well, controllers actually return a thing called IActionResult. And it's basically a promise to do a certain action. It says, here's the action I want you to take. So when I gave you a string, I was really saying, make me a view and pass the string back, okay? And IActionResult there's a bunch of different options. I think we can actually search for IActionResult. And there were a bunch of options. Content result, file result. Think about that. Someone says /Maria in the URL. What do you want? Usually you want HTML.
Yeah, usually.
But you could also have JavaScript, a file, some HTTP status code. Maria might redirect you somewhere else entirely. A content result is like empty strings. It's just a user-defined a bunch of content. So when we said, hey, it's Scott, and we returned a string, we were really going and making a new content result and putting string Scott into that thing. And there's, in fact, a helper method for it. There's a base class called controller that we're going to use. And in controller is return content. And let's look at what the help says. Returns a content result with the current string. So what I want to say to you is that these two things
Are
Go ahead.
Are those two things the same?
Effectively. The result is the same between those two indexes.
Oh.
But that's no fun to write.
No.
That's a kind of a convenience. Okay? So to your point with our friend here, let's this time go to controllers and then just switch directly over to views and come back, because we're moving our way around this.
So we're going to leave models alone for a bit.
For just a second, and we're trying to figure out how this view situation works.
Okay.
Okay. So instead of returning content, let's return a view. Okay.
So that means in order to return a view, don't we need to add something?
We absolutely do. But I'm going to pretend that I don't know that.
Okay, let's rewind.
Yeah,
we had no idea that happened.
No, it's fine. So let's pretend that we don't know that. And let's visit our page again. So it was /Scott.
Yeah.
All right. /Scott. Now, are we in
Is
production?
your application still running?
It is still running. And you'll notice
You've got a few.
a couple of things. I want to point this out. This is a great opportunity for us to both learn. We got a 500 error. Okay, 400s are mostly it's your fault, and 500s are mostly it's the server's.
It's the server's fault. So
Okay.
so we shouldn't feel too bad about it.
No, because the site may have a programming error. So they're basically pointing the finger at us.
At us anyway. Okay.
So why aren't we getting a friendly error? Why aren't we being told?
What exactly it is?
Yeah. Where's the yellow screen of death or the light blue screen of death that tells us, oh gosh, you forgot.
I remember earlier, did we have a user? Developer exception page.
So we say app use developer exception page. That's the page for developers to see their exceptions.
What's happening.
But it only happens in one scenario.
If it's in development.
It's in development. So I'm going to go back to my command prompt here, and let's scroll back. Oops. I'll run it again.
Because I believe we are to see what mode we're in. Yeah, we're in fancy production.
Yes. We didn't just have regular production.
We had a fancy one.
We have fancy production. So fancy production is decidedly not even close to developer exception page, right? To development. Fancy production is fancy. So let us change our properties for our application to development. Because you wouldn't want an exception page to go out into the world.
No.
That showed all your code.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be bad.
It happens all the time. It happens all the time. People are sloppy. All right.
Okay, that looks a lot friendlier.
It is friendly. Not only is it friendly, but it shows you the query string and cookies and headers that got passed in. And it's saying something very specific. So let's compare. Let's put the code next to it so we know what's going on. /Scott controller, that's cool. Remember that index was our default.
Yeah.
Okay, called index. And we said return view. The view index is not found, but it looked in a very specific location.
So that's really neat. So it knew exactly where to go.
Right, because remember I said before, convention over configuration.
Yeah.
Maybe in the old days, like last week, there would be some configuration file somewhere that would say, oh, the views are over here.
Yeah.
And views should be, but this is more of a convention where views are in the views folder. And views have a subfolder, which is the name of the controller. And then the action is the name of the file.
Okay.
So if I change this, let's just I want to make absolutely sure that we're clear about this. I'm going to make another action result. Fancy, totally unreal. How do I spell? Unrealistic.
That's close enough.
You think that's enough?
That's enough.
Is that too much?
It's overwhelmingly great.
It's a little extra. Okay, so I'm going to run this.
Oh, but did you notice it showed you a couple of potential fixes?
I'm sure it probably didn't like that name at all. Scott/fancy totally unrealistic method name. I just like messing with the error handling system. The view, fancy totally unrealistic method name, was not found. So it shows you that there's an absolutely direct relationship between the name of the method and the file it looks for.
So it has to have the same name.
It has to have the same name.
So
unless I pass in a name, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, and one thing I also noticed is that there were two view folders.
Ah, that's a great point.
You had views, which is Scott. Then you had shared.
And all the different times that we've been doing this, we've been getting shared as an option. So it searched them in that order. It says here, the following locations were searched. First I looked here, and then I looked there. So you're right. Shared is somewhere that we could have one view that Maria and Scott could use.
Okay.
Okay. So let's start by fixing this first scenario.
So I assume you'd have to create a new folder called views.
Exactly. So we'll do that. Now, of course, we won't have to do that when we start with an MVC application that's done entirely with the File New Project experience, but this is good to understand how the process works. So new item, asp.net view page. We'll talk about layouts a little bit later. And I'm just going to call it index.
And the C, that's something I always notice, the CS with the HTML. I always call it the C# HTML.
Yeah. It's CS/HTML, or it's the color razor page.
Oh, okay.
There was talk about making it .razor because it would sound really cool, but apparently it would involve changing a bunch of stuff they didn't want to change. Would have been cool though.
It would have been cool.
This is my index view. Here's some HTML. This is a paragraph. Yay. Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, you're finally writing in.
Yeah, I get, I got a little lazy there. Oh, I got to make sure that my application is set up for IIS and that I'm not doing any custom URL stuff. Remember how we set that URL?
Yep.
We'll get rid of that. Okay, and then let's go make sure our launch settings are cool.
Should it have that as a launch URL?
I think so. I don't know. Development 53461. Build it and run it. Aw, well, that's annoying.
So let's have a look at why it's giving you.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to.
So this is an interesting thing. So before we had the developer exception page that kind of give us a little bit more detail.
That's a good point.
Why don't we have it now?
Well, because we haven't been able to reach anything. In this particular case, it's not even getting as far as the ports. So I'm not even seeing IIS, starting up. So I don't, the browser is not giving us enough information. Now, if I go down here and look at IIS, IIS is on 53641.
Which is the same.
Ah, I'm not even thinking. I'm so silly. It's been fine. It's a 404, not a 500. This is important. This is really important. There's a 404, which is saying I didn't find it.
Yeah.
The 500, which says something horrible happened on the back end. Right? Exactly. And then there was this port is totally different and totally wrong. In this particular case, I was moving so fast that I wasn't actually paying attention and did not notice. I just saw, oh, bad error, and I closed things up, which is sloppy of me. So that's a good reminder to folks. All right, so let's try this again. And I keep going up and saying 404, and I change it to /Scott. I'm going to go, with all due respect, and I'm going to change Scott to the default controller.
If you got to.
Sorry. So let's fire this up. There we go.
Okay. So now it's a default. And that's why we were able to go straight and see it.
Exactly. So if we go back to here, we went like that.
Okay.
But there's no model yet. We haven't done the full circle yet. Okay. We need to do something with that model and pass some information in or something. So let's think about that. Oh, and by the way, the view thing, we talked about sharing views.
Yes.
Right now, we're in the Scott controller index method. Your Maria controller can be up here. And I could pass in the name of a view. Like if there was a Scott view, I could pass that view in. Now that's not going to work because there isn't a Scott view, right? But it's not going to go and look for index though. So let's see the difference. Maria/index. So this will be the default. Maria. The view Scott was not found. See, it looked for Scott in Maria. And then it also looked in shared. Now I could make a Scott view and put it in a folder called shared.
I think you have to copy it physically. Okay.
So we're going to do that. So we made a new one. This is my totally shared view. Shared. And notice this, I didn't even have to rebuild. I just refreshed because it's looking every single time in that folder.
Okay.
Okay, so Maria is using a shared view, but Scott is using a custom.
Is using a custom view.
Right.
So if you had like a shared template, was this where you do something like this?
Right, and then you could make what's called a layout, a model view, an MVC layout page, which is like the larger layout that everyone can share, and then everyone can have a
the little bits in the middle. Okay.
Exactly. All right, so let's try to pass some stuff in. I think it was called ViewBag.
So ViewBag is what exactly?
Well, there's two different things. There's a ViewBag, which is a place to put content. It's a dynamic.
Okay.
And the other one is called View Data. Let's put a message in there. Hello from Scott's controller. Now that's a model. We're just we're stowing it in this dictionary.
So you're putting the model right into the controller.
In this case, the model is not so fancy.
It's just
a string.
All right.
But you got to start somewhere. Okay. So then, can we go back over here and do something with that? View data. Message.
So it should basically say, hey.
Hello. It's not a very good message.
Yeah, it's kind of polite-ish.
No, it sucks.
Okay.
So that model just got passed in this bag or this dictionary of stuff.
So is the model how we share data?
That's how you share data when you are making this circle.
Okay.
So the URL comes in /Scott or /Maria. The controller does stuff, and that's for debate. Whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Go to the database, log into Twitter, whatever makes you happy. As you pointed out here, it manipulates the model. In this case, I just put it into a pile called view data. We'll do another model in a moment, view data. The model is sent over to the view, which then displays it. And then, of course, the person sees it, and then
the cycle continues.
Exactly. Okay? But this model kind of sucks because it's just a string in a bag. And like, what if I go like this? Oops, I misspelled that. I meant to spell message, but I spelled oops, misspelling.
Misspelling.
Maybe I'll just say message with 3 S's.
Oh, okay.
Right? You could see that happening.
Oh, yeah.
Did it compile? Yeah, totally compiled.
But there's no message, because it doesn't know what message with 3 S's is.
Exactly. More specifically, that returned, quote, quote, nothing.
Nothing was there. So
yeah. We're lucky it didn't break everything. But the point is that the compiler didn't see that misspelling because it's just a string. How could it know? How could it know? I can put whatever I want in here, compile, where it works great because it's a dictionary. Not cool. So let's do something better. Let's make another class, public class. I'm just going to call it, Scott IndexViewModel. There's lots of ways you could name the class, but this is it's the view model. It's the way, it's the view that. How can I phrase this? It is an object that looks like the stuff the view needs.
It's an object that looks like the stuff that the view needs.
Let's think about it like this. I could go and go to the database and get a product object.
Okay.
So it would be a model, a database model. And I could hand it to the view, and the view could show it, and that's fine. But not always does the view look like the database. Like you might say, here's a product, but you really need products and orders and order details, right? It could be big and complicated. So what I really need is a view model that has a bunch of other stuff on it, and the view model looks like the page looks.
Okay, so let's say we had a database that had people's information, like names, phone numbers, and birthdays.
Right.
So the model would look similar to that, but the way we'd want to display on the page. So if we had a bunch of text boxes.
Right. So if the view on the page looks different from the database, like if it's got name and age, but then address comes from a totally different database, I would bring the two together in the controller.
Okay.
Put them in a view model, and then say, here is what the view, and that way the view isn't thinking about the database.
No, it doesn't need to worry about it.
It gets a dumb object.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go and say here, I'm going to actually go back and say prop tab tab string tab tab name prop tab tab int tab tab name prop tab tab.
That's a pretty neat.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. That's a snippet. Prop, and then you go tab tab, and it expands. So here we just made a Scott view model, and actually I don't need birthday. We'll just do name and age for now. Okay. And instead of doing this, let's make a new one. Okay. Now at this point, I could say .age and .name and fill it out, but I could also just do it all on one line. Okay, so now that is a Scott index view model. It's in this object, and it's ready to go. Now, let's pretend that came from the database.
Okay, let's just pretend there's some database out there.
It comes from wherever. This is part of the magic of the controller. Where did it come from?
I don't care.
Doesn't matter.
Okay.
It could come from Entity Framework that we'll learn about in the advanced and the intermediate day. It could come from a web service. It could come from anywhere.
Anywhere. So it doesn't
It is the controller's job to do that, to find that data, and to, if it has to go to 3 different places, and do it.
Okay.
But then it brings it together into one object it hands to the view. So let's hand that to the view. And we know it's called, in this case, a Scott index view model. We could call it whatever. I'll go back over to my index page, okay? And I'm going to say @model, pass in Scott index view model. And I may need to include the full namespace. Yeah, see how it doesn't like it? I'll put the full namespace. Typically, you put that in its own namespace, like view models or something like that. Okay. So then, instead of doing it like this, so I say and that kind of, this is called Razor that we're in right here. This is HTML. As soon as I say I can do C#. Yeah.
Oh, so it's indicating that C# is about to happen?
Right. And the whole page is called a Razor page. It is a mix of HTML and C#. Exactly. So now I say model dot name. See? I got IntelliSense. That means that this would break if I misspelled something. The compiler would notice. If I said .foo or whatever,
or
that's gonna fit. Yeah, ages. That's a good point. See, it actually squiggled.
It does not contain this definition.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So yes, age or ages, spelling errors would show up there. So that's why that's better than putting things in a bag. But sometimes you want to do a little of both. You might pass the object and then a little bit of extra information, like an error message.
And that's something that is appropriate to put in a bag?
Totally appropriate, because think about this. Here's my page now, looking awesome.
Yeah, everything's looking awesome.
It worked just as it should, and including my age, which is great.
Yeah, I didn't know you were younger than me.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, wow.
It's very young, very young. Fresh. If there were an optional error message, maybe that would be in the view data, and it would be like, error message.
So could you put, let's say if someone's misspelled something, not misspelled it, let's say they've misputting in information.
Right, so we'll do some form validation.
Would that be an appropriate thing to put in the data?
Exactly, so the data would come across in the model, but then some localized error message or something that the server noticed that, this age is too young, or you're 150 years old, or whatever, could then come in kind of on a sidecar. So you've got your main view model and then extra stuff in the bag.
So if you fill in the form and said age 29, it would be like you're lying?
Yeah, you could do that if you wanted to.
Okay.
It's good. Cool. So in this case here, let's just make it all together. Get the model from the database or wherever. Totally up to the person. We'll look at another application in a little bit with a little more sophistication. Do some stuff, and then pass it on to the next location. All right? So if we go back to our
diagram?
Before we go to the diagram, I want to show you this. This is the patterns wiki from Ward Cunningham.
So who's Ward Cunningham?
Ward Cunningham invented the wiki.
Okay.
Not Wikipedia, but the concept of the wiki.
Okay, just having a G.
He made it up. So automatic linking of Pascal cased files, all this stuff. He's got this great patterns repository, the Portland patterns repository, where he talks about MVC. And he says, the easy way is to understand is the model is the data, and the view is on the screen, and the controller is the glue. And that's really, really good. And check this out, though. He says, smart models, thin controllers, and dumb views. You don't want to have logic
in your view.
In your view.
Okay.
It's not its job. Its job is to show stuff.
It's just display stuff to us.
So you want to avoid putting too much validation in your view. You don't want to call the database from your view. Your view takes fairly dumb models or fairly dumb view models and then shows them.
Okay.
All right. Cool. So that is a trite but still pretty decent example of how this works, and it follows this diagram. But you made a better diagram.
I did make a better diagram.
So in this diagram here, we see how the browser or the user talks to the controller, does something with the model, updates the view. In reality, it's a little bit more like this.
It's a little bit more like this. So technically, from what I've understood from this experience so far, is that I go into a browser and I know where I'm going. So I go to HTTP MVC. And what actually happens is that there's some sort of mapping to a route.
Right, the routing table, exactly. And in this case, in the case of MVC, it's the routing middleware.
Which we don't really see anymore.
It's been hidden because MVC makes it convenient.
It makes it convenient.
Yeah.
But we saw how it came together during our routing section.
Exactly. Okay?
Then from the routing, that's when the controller steps in.
You're right. Somebody, the magic
in
system,
the way,
makes it news up, or it creates a controller, and it calls an action on that controller. And then that would be like, you know, foo or whatever action gets called. That is going to then
send it over to the model, which
make a model, go to the database, whatever.
Okay, and then then it goes right back.
Because I might go to the database. Like if we go and look at it like this, it could be check user input, go to database, check data, pass to view. You know, it's kind of like when we say do stuff.
This is the stuff it's doing.
It's coordinating. It's the controller, right? It's trying to bring that whole system together. So routes come in. Controller is the brain.
The brain of the
Data could be database, could be web server, another web server, could be whatever. And then sends the model back to the view.
Okay, and then we see it.
Exactly.
So it sounds like a lot of stuff that just happens in an instant.
It does happen in an instant. It actually happens in milliseconds. There's all sorts of other things you can do, more advanced techniques for caching and stuff. But if we go and do this and just run it, let's actually look at the results. If we run this
we
can do it two ways. That's a good point. We can do it in Kestrel. But if I hit debug, we get this thing called diagnostics tools, which is pretty cool. So this here sees all the different events in the memory that gets used. So I'm sitting here going refresh, 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 and seeing that the memory and CPU usage is very flat. If I ran it under Kestrel, we would see some of the logging. We can also see the logging down here in output. So that logging appears, right there, and you can see the files that get loaded. But I like to see the command prompt sometimes, because then remember the relationship between 5,000 and 8081? We decided to switch it over to 5,000.
And then we forgot to switch it back.
But I remember now, because I've learned it. Right, so as I go, look, finished in 50 milliseconds.
Wow.
Yeah, minimal amount of work happening here. 30 milliseconds, whatever.
So what did people do before all this?
Well, so if you're using like early versions of PHP or early versions of classic ASP, the model, the view, and the controller were all in one file.
Whoa.
Right? Index.asp.
Okay.
And it was okay, and it worked fine, and we got lots of great work done, except when apps get complicated, you're going to wish that things were nice and separated and clean.
And that's how MVC came. Okay.
So that's the intro to the intro of MVC. But we haven't yet done any forms.
How do we get that data?
Right. User data, some validation of that data, maybe a little bit of database stuff.
Today?
Just a smidge.
We'll see.
All right. We'll be right back.